The first email arrived at exactly 6:12 in the morning, and I almost missed it because nothing about the subject line suggested it would change everything. It read, Community Event, Cabin Access Confirmation, Saturday. Polite. Bland. The kind of subject line you delete without opening. But something made me click it, and when I read the first 3 lines I had to put my coffee down and read the whole thing twice more just to make sure I was understanding it correctly. The email stated, without question or apology, that my cabin had been reserved for the HOA's annual summer gathering. It listed 100 expected guests. It included a full catering timeline, a vendor contact list, a parking diagram, and a note about where the DJ would be setting up equipment. My name appeared nowhere in the email. Not as an invitee. Not as a property owner. Not even as a footnote. I was simply not part of the equation. I checked the sender. Margaret Doyle, president of the Ridgeline Homeowners Association. I had seen her name on newsletters I never read and meeting minutes someone always forwarded without asking. She was the kind of person who treated every shared space like a personal project and every rule like a tool she had invented herself. I had intentionally kept my distance since buying the property 2 years ago. No meetings. No introductions. No visibility. I paid my dues on time and responded to nothing, which meant to someone like Margaret I barely existed. I was background. I was manageable. I was the kind of neighbor who would read an email like this and either comply quietly or send a politely worded objection she could ignore. She had no idea what she had just walked into. I set the email aside and went back outside to stand on the porch. The lake was still. The trees were holding the early morning light the way they always did at this hour, slow and golden and completely indifferent to human drama. My cabin sat on 12 acres of private land at the eastern edge of the subdivision, and the geography of it mattered more than most people realized. Every road that connected the community to the waterfront passed through my property. Every utility easement. Every access point. The HOA did not own any of it. They leased it, through a parent entity called Ridgeline Holdings, under a contract that included very specific language about permitted use, event limitations, and what happened when those terms were violated. I was Ridgeline Holdings. Not the only stakeholder, but the controlling one. I had structured it that way deliberately, not out of suspicion, but out of experience. When you own infrastructure that other people depend on, you learn quickly that the moment they forget it belongs to you is the moment you need the paperwork most. I went back inside and opened the email thread from the beginning. There were 11 messages total. Vendors confirming delivery windows. A caterer asking about refrigeration access. A parking service requesting gate codes. A banner company sending a proof for something called the Doyle Lakeside Gala, which apparently was what Margaret had named the event, after herself. None of these vendors had contacted me. They had all gone through Margaret, who had distributed my gate code, a code pulled from an 18-month-old emergency access filing, as if it were hers to share. She had not asked? She had assumed. And in doing so she had handed me something I had not expected, a perfect opportunity to let her build something magnificent on a foundation she did not own, and then, at exactly the right moment, remove it entirely. I checked the date. Saturday was 3 days away. I picked up my phone and called my operations manager. I told him to pull the full access log for the property, prepare a temporary lockdown protocol for all entry points, and have the Ridgeline Holdings infrastructure agreement ready for presentation. He asked no questions. He never does. By noon I had everything in order. I was not going to warn her. I was not going to negotiate. I was going to let her arrive, let her set up, let her guests fill the road and the deck and the lawn, and then I was going to lock the gate. Not out of anger. Out of principle. Because the most effective response to someone who assumes they own what they don't is not an argument. It is a demonstration. The next 3 days I did nothing that would signal anything was coming, and that restraint was harder than it sounds. Margaret sent 2 more emails during that window, both administrative in tone, either addressed to me directly. The first confirmed the catering delivery time as 10 a.m. Saturday. The second included an updated parking diagram that now showed my entire gravel driveway sectioned into numbered stalls with a small triangle marked bus drop-off position directly in front of my porch steps. She had mapped out my property with the precision of someone who had been there before, and for a moment I wondered if she had come to walk the land while I was away. I checked the surveillance logs. She had not. She had just assumed the layout from satellite images and the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. I spent those 3 days doing what I always do when something important is about to happen. I prepared quietly and I waited patiently. My operations manager reset the electronic lock on the east gate to a new code that only he and I held. He also disabled the secondary code that Margaret had distributed to the vendors. The old emergency access number that should have expired 18 months ago, but had never been formally revoked. That oversight was mine. I noted it and fixed it. Every surveillance camera on the property was tested, angled, and confirmed recording. I prepared a physical folder with 3 documents inside: the Ridgeline Holdings Infrastructure Agreement, the current property deed, and a 1-page summary of the access easement terms including the penalty clause for unauthorized commercial use. I also drafted a brief message to the County Code Enforcement Office, not filed, just ready, outlining the nature of an unpermitted gathering on private land. I did not send it. I wanted to see what Saturday produced on its own before introducing external pressure. I had learned over the years that situations like this tend to generate their own consequences if you simply stop intervening on behalf of the person causing them. Margaret had invited 100 people. She had hired vendors. She had a DJ, a caterer, a parking service, and a banner with her own name on it. All of it pointed to a woman who had committed fully to a plan without checking a single foundational assumption. That level of exposure does not need help collapsing. It only needs the one thing holding it up to be removed. On Friday evening I drove out to the property and walked the perimeter slowly. The lake was reflecting the last of the orange sky. The road was empty and clean. I checked the gate one final time, lock seated, camera positioned, secondary latch secured, then I walked up to the porch and sat for a while in the quiet. I thought about the moment Margaret would see my face and realize I was not just another homeowner. I thought about the exact look that crosses someone's face when they understand, all at once, that the ground they have been standing on belongs to someone else. I had seen that look before. It is not anger. It is not embarrassment. It is something quieter and more permanent, the specific kind of stillness that settles in when a person realizes their confidence was borrowed from someone who never offered it. I drove home before dark and set my alarm for early. Saturday was going to require patience, and patience requires rest. I slept without difficulty. I always do before something that has already been decided. The smell hit me before I even turned off the engine. Charcoal and cheap beer threading through the pine trees at a volume that told me the party had started at least an hour before the catering was scheduled to arrive, which meant someone had decided the timeline was flexible once they had access to the grounds. I sat in my truck for a moment with the window down and listened. Bass from a speaker system. Voices layered over each other in that particular register that belongs to people who believe they are exactly where they are supposed to be. A charter bus was idling at the edge of the road with its hazard lights blinking in a slow orange pulse. 3 rental vans were parked diagonally across the grass strip beside the driveway in a way that would have been charming at an actual venue and was simply illegal here. I stepped out and let my boots settle into the gravel. The gate was still open. I had left it that way deliberately. I needed them inside before I closed it. I needed the full weight of the situation to be present and visible before I shifted it. I walked up the drive slowly, taking in the details. Someone had strung lights between 2 of my oak trees. Someone else had assembled a folding table on my deck and covered it with a white cloth and arrangements of sunflowers in tin buckets. A laminated sign zip-tied to my porch railing read HOA Community Summer Event in a font that suggested someone had spent real time choosing it. And in the center of everything, standing on my porch steps with a clipboard in one hand and a phone in the other, and the specific posture of a woman who has never once doubted her right to occupy any space she chooses, was Margaret Doyle. She was directing two men where to unload a stack of folding chairs. She was doing it with the ease of someone running an event they had planned for months, which she had, just not on land she owned, which she had apparently decided was a minor administrative distinction. She did not notice me at first. I kept walking toward her, unhurried, and when I was close enough that ignoring me became a choice rather than an oversight, I said, "Excuse me." She turned. The smile she was already wearing did not shift at all. It was a smile built for interruptions, practiced and immediate, the kind that says I have already decided how this conversation ends. "Oh good," she said, "you made it? We are running just slightly ahead of schedule." I looked past her at the deck, where a man was testing speaker cables by playing a single thumping bass note at irregular intervals. "You told people this cabin was reserved," I said. She nodded as if I had confirmed something. "Of course. It has been on the community calendar all week." I let that sit for exactly one beat. "You do not have a calendar for my property," I said. Her smile tightened by a fraction, just enough to tell me she had registered the word "my" and was deciding whether to address it. She tapped her clipboard instead. "Per HOA community use guidelines," she said, "seasonal facilities within the association boundary are available for approved events." There it was. The language. The structure she had built in her mind to make this feel official. I looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then I nodded once. "You should have asked," I said. She smiled, bigger this time, the smile of someone who has decided the conversation is over and she has won it. "We do not need to," she said. I turned away before she could see my face change and walked back down the drive without another word. The gate was exactly where I had left it. Open. Waiting. I wrapped my hand around the cold metal latch, felt the familiar weight of it, and pulled it shut. The bolt seated with a sound smaller than the moment deserved. I took the key from my jacket pocket, turned it once, and heard the lock engage, clean, final, irreversible. I stepped back and pocketed the key. Behind me the party continued for approximately 40 seconds before the first honk cut through the bass. Short. Questioning. Then another, longer. Then an engine revving against a road that had no room left to maneuver. I walked to the side of the fence, checked the secondary latch, secured, and took out my phone. Margaret had already called twice. I watched her name appear a third time and let it ring through. On the fourth call, I answered. "You locked the gate," she said. No greeting. Just the words, delivered with the precision of someone who has realized something has gone wrong but has not yet accepted the scale of it. "I secured my property," I said. The same tone I had used on the porch. Calm. Even. Without performance. She laughed, short and sharp, the laugh of someone reaching for disbelief because it is more comfortable than the alternative. "You cannot do that," she said. "We have guests arriving." I looked down the road from where I was standing. I could count at least 11 vehicles backed up to the curve. The bus had straightened itself but had nowhere to go. "Then they should not have come," I said. A pause. Longer than the ones before it. "You are creating a problem," she said. "No," I said. "I am containing one." I could hear the noise shifting behind her, less festive now, more confused, the specific acoustic signature of a crowd that has started asking questions and is not getting answers. "You need to open that gate," she said. Her voice had dropped into negotiation register. "We will wrap up early. We will be gone by 4. I let the silence carry for a moment before I answered. "You scheduled this without permission," I said. "You told people they could access infrastructure you do not own." "The HOA has authority over community events," she said. I looked at the line of cars. Someone had clipped a mirror trying to squeeze past. I could hear the plastic crack from where I stood. "You should start making calls," I said. "Because once this gets logged, it is not just your event anymore." I ended the call before she could respond and waited for what I already knew was coming next. The first official vehicle arrived from the main county road, not from inside the neighborhood, and it came quietly, no urgency in the lights, just presence, the kind of presence that changes a situation's category from private to documented. A sheriff's cruiser pulled in behind the backup of vehicles and an officer stepped out and stood for a moment looking at the line of cars, the idling bus, the congestion that had begun to spill onto the public road. He was taking it in the way people trained for this take things in, not reacting, just recording. I stayed where I was, by the fence, visible but not approaching. I had learned a long time ago that the most powerful position in a situation like this is the still one. Margaret came off the porch the moment she saw the cruiser. Her heels clicked across the wood and then the gravel, and she moved with the restored authority of someone who has decided that law enforcement is on her side because she has always believed institutions are. She stopped when she saw the full extent of the backup. Cars to the bend. Delivery trucks sideways. Bus driver now standing outside with his arms folded. She turned and found me by the fence, and walked toward me with the specific energy of someone who has just realized they need to change tactics, but has not yet decided what the new tactic is. This needs to be opened, she said. Why, I said. One word. Flat. She blinked. Because emergency services need access, she said. I nodded toward the road. They can access the county route, I said. The gate controls private entry only. A second vehicle arrived. White truck, county code enforcement seal on the door, clipboard on the dashboard. Margaret saw it at the same moment I did, and I watched something shift in her posture. Not collapse. Just recalculation. You arranged this, she said. Not accusing. Just recognizing the shape of what was happening. I shook my head. You scheduled an unpermitted event on private land, I said. You directed traffic onto a restricted access road. You created congestion that spilled onto a county route. I paused. I locked my gate. The code enforcement officer stepped out and began photographing the scene systematically. Road, vehicles, cabin, crowd. Margaret turned back to me. Her voice had dropped. Open it, and we can fix this before it goes further, she said. I reached into my jacket and produced the folded document I had prepared 3 days earlier. I held it up but did not hand it over yet. You cannot fix what is already being recorded, I said. You can only respond to it. The county officer who had been taking notes approached us and introduced himself with the efficiency of someone who has handled exactly this kind of situation before and intends to handle it the same way, thoroughly, without drama, and with documentation that will outlast everyone present. What is the nature of this gathering? He asked. Margaret stepped forward first. Of course she did. We are hosting a community association event, she said. Her voice had found its professional register again, the one that says I am the responsible party, and I have everything under control. There has been a misunderstanding about gate access. The officer nodded slowly and looked at me. And you are, he said. I told him my name and my relationship to the property. He wrote it down. Do you have a permit for a gathering of this size? He asked, looking back at Margaret. Margaret hesitated, just a fraction of a second, the kind of hesitation that well-trained observers notice immediately. This is private community property, she said. It falls under association jurisdiction. The officer looked at me again and I handed him the document without a word. He unfolded it, scanned the header, moved to the second paragraph, then the third. His posture changed slightly, not dramatically, just a small settling, the physical equivalent of a man whose initial read of a situation has just been confirmed by paperwork. This property is registered under Ridgeline Holdings, he said, reading aloud. Yes, I said. And the access road, the utility corridor, and the east gate are all governed under the same entity. He flipped to the second page. Private infrastructure. Restricted commercial use. Event authorization requires written approval from the controlling stakeholder. He looked up at Margaret. Do you have that authorization? She opened her mouth. Then she closed it. Then she opened it again, and what came out was not an answer but a deflection. The HOA has managed events in this community for years. This arrangement has always been understood. The calendar confirmation was sent through proper channels. The officer listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, The calendar confirmation is an internal document. It does not constitute authorization from the property owner. Margaret looked at the document in the officer's hands. Then she looked at me. The HOA has a management agreement, she said. Quieter now. With the county. With the utilities. I nodded once. They lease access, I said. Through Ridgeline. On terms that explicitly exclude unpermitted commercial gatherings and the resulting infrastructure load. I let that word sit, commercial, because it was the one she had not thought about. She had called this a community event. But the catering contract, the DJ fee, the valet service, the banner with her name on it, every one of those was a commercial transaction conducted on private land without authorization. That distinction mattered legally in a way that a simple gathering would not have. The officer handed the document back to me with the specific care of someone who has recognized its weight. Sir, he said, are you the authorized representative of Ridgeline Holdings? I am, I said. He nodded and began writing again. Margaret pressed her lips together. Her hands had stopped moving. The clipboard was still, the phone was at her side, the constant small gestures of a person managing a situation had gone quiet. The HOA carries liability coverage, she said, almost to herself. For approved activities, I said. This is not an approved activity. Behind us the code enforcement officer had finished photographing and was now speaking into his radio in the clipped, precise language of someone filing a formal report. Every word he said was being recorded. Every timestamp was being logged. The event that Margaret had built on assumption was now being dismantled by documentation, one line at a time. The compliance truck arrived 40 minutes after the first cruiser, and its arrival was the moment the crowd stopped being a party and became a situation. Not because of sirens, there were none, but because of the word printed on the side of the truck in clean official lettering, compliance. People who are innocently attending a community barbecue do not change their behavior when they see county compliance vehicles. People who are standing on property that is actively being investigated do. The shift moved through the crowd in waves. First the people closest to the road, then the vendors, then the guests nearest the cabin, then the last holdouts near the water who had not been paying attention and suddenly found themselves surrounded by people asking questions nobody could answer. The catering team stopped unloading. The DJ powered down his equipment without being asked. The parking attendants, who had been directing cars with the cheerful authority of people who believe their temporary role gives them permanent standing, stood together near the bus and said nothing. Margaret was in the center of all of it, moving between conversations, managing questions with the diminishing returns of someone spending energy faster than they can generate it. I watched her from the fence. Her circuit was tightening, each conversation shorter, each answer less certain, each rotation bringing her back to the same fixed point without resolution. A man in a linen shirt intercepted her near the deck and held up his phone showing her something, a message from a vendor or a guest, or possibly a board member, and she read it and handed the phone back without comment, which was more telling than anything she could have said. The second compliance official approached us together, Margaret and me, and addressed her directly. Ma'am, we need to review your authorization documentation for this event. He was polite. Professional. The kind of polite that does not leave room for charm. Margaret produced her phone and navigated to the email thread and handed it over. He scrolled through it slowly, in the way of someone who knows what they are looking for and is confirming its absence. He handed it back. This does not include property authorization from the controlling stakeholder, he said. The HOA approved it, Margaret said. He nodded. The HOA does not control this parcel, he said. That was the sentence that mattered most. Not because it was new information, I had said it, the first officer had implied it, the document had confirmed it, but because this was the first time it had been said in front of the crowd. People nearby had gone quiet without pretending to. They were listening. They were recording. A woman nearby had already raised her phone and was filming. And now the official record of the day included a county compliance officer stating, clearly, on private land, in front of witnesses, that Margaret Doyle had organized and executed an event on property she did not control and could not authorize. Everything after that was consequence. Margaret came to me directly after the compliance official stepped away to take a call, and when she came this time she came without the clipboard, without the performance, without the constructed posture of a woman who has always believed the situation will bend to meet her. She came as someone who has run out of intermediaries and has nothing left but the original conversation she should have had 3 days ago. "What do you want?" she asked. It was a direct question, and I gave it a direct answer. "I want you to understand what you did," I said. She shook her head, not in disagreement, but in the way of someone dismissing the framing. "This is not the time for a lesson," she said. I tilted my head slightly. "This is the only time it works," I said. A tow truck had appeared at the edge of the road, summoned by someone, to begin clearing vehicles that could not maneuver out on their own. The bus driver was in conversation with an officer, and gesturing toward the cabin in a way that suggested he was explaining where he had been told to go, and by whom. Every conversation happening around us was a thread being pulled, and every thread led back to the same source. "Fine," Margaret said. "Explain it." So I did. Calmly. Without satisfaction, because there was none to take from it. This was not a victory I had wanted, it was a correction that had been necessary. "You announced an event on property you do not own," I said. "You invited 117 people. I had checked the RSVP list in the vendor files, without a permit, without liability coverage for the actual location, and without authorization from the entity that controls the infrastructure they all depended on to get here. You distributed a private access code that was not yours to share. You created commercial contracts using an address you have no legal authority over. And when the resulting congestion extended onto a county route, it triggered mandatory enforcement documentation that will now be tied to your name, your association's name, and the addresses of every board member who approved this event. The HOA carries insurance," she said. "I know," I said. "It covers approved activities within defined limits. The insurer's first question when they receive the incident report will be, 'Where is the authorization?' And the answer will be that there is none. Because you did not ask." She was quiet for a long moment. Around us the crowd continued to thin. Cars were leaving in the order they could, which was slow and complicated and expensive for everyone involved. The vendors had given up waiting and were calculating losses on phones. The caterer had left 20 minutes earlier with full coolers and a breach of contract claim she was already discussing with someone on the phone. I stepped slightly closer, not to close distance, just to make sure the next part landed. "Clearly. The infrastructure agreement includes penalty provisions," I said. "Triggered by unauthorized use that results in documented disruption." She did not respond. Because she now understood that this was not a fine that would appear on a quarterly HOA statement and be absorbed quietly. This was a contractual breach claim, attached to a formal incident report, backed by surveillance logs and county documentation, and it was going to require real answers from real people who were going to want to know how it happened and whose decision it was. She already knew whose decision it was. So did everyone else. By the time the sun dropped below the tree line, the road was empty in the way that only follows something that cannot be undone. Not peaceful empty. Settled empty. The kind of stillness that belongs to a place after a decision has been made and its consequences have begun their quiet, permanent work. The vendors were gone. The tow truck had cleared the last stuck vehicle an hour earlier. The county officers had filed their reports, exchanged final documentation, and departed without ceremony. The compliance truck was the last official vehicle to leave, and it left the same way it arrived, without drama, carrying records that would exist in multiple systems for as long as those systems maintained their archives. Margaret stood alone at the edge of the gravel road for a long time after the last guest left. She did not look at her phone. She did not make calls. She just stood there with the particular stillness of someone letting the full shape of something arrive without trying to manage it anymore. Eventually she walked toward me. Her steps were measured. Her face had the specific quality of someone who has moved through the stages of a difficult realization and arrived at the final one. Not anger, not denial, not negotiation, but the quiet, permanent acknowledgement that something has changed and will not change back. "This is not over," she said. It was the kind of statement that people make when they need to believe forward motion is still possible. I nodded. You are right, I said. It is not. The invoices will arrive first, I continued, keeping my tone even. Factual, without edge. From the caterer, the DJ, the parking service, the equipment rental. All of them have contracts, and all of those contracts have breached provisions, and all of those provisions will name the party who authorized the event. Then the county report will be finalized and distributed to the relevant departments, including the one that handles unpermitted commercial use of private infrastructure. Then the Ridgeline Holdings legal team will evaluate the penalty clause in the access agreement and determine the appropriate response to an unauthorized event that generated documented county enforcement activity. I let that settle. The HOA will handle it, she said. The HOA will be named in it, I replied. Handling it is different. That was when I saw the last piece settle into place for her. Not just personal consequence, the professional kind she had already begun calculating, but collective consequence. Every homeowner in the association. Every reserve fund. Every shared liability. All of it now connected to a decision that one person made without asking and without checking, driven entirely by the assumption that the ground she was standing on belonged to her in some way that mattered. She looked at the gate. Closed. Still. Unchanged from the moment I had locked it, which now felt like a different era entirely. You could have just told me no, she said. There was no accusation in it. Just the quiet version of a question that had nowhere useful to go. I considered it honestly. I could have, I said. But you did not ask. She absorbed that. She nodded once, not agreement, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked back down the road the way she had come, alone, at a pace that had nothing left to prove. I watched her until she disappeared past the bend. Then I turned back toward the lake. The water was still holding the last light, flat and silver and completely undisturbed by everything that had occurred in its proximity. I rested my hand on the gate one final time. Cold metal. Clean edges. Exactly where it had always been. The difference between this evening and every evening before it was not the gate. It was not the lock. It was not the document in my jacket or the cameras or the county records or the penalty clauses. The difference was understanding. And understanding, once it arrives at the right moment, costs exactly as much as the assumptions that made it necessary. The gate stayed closed. The lake stayed still. And somewhere down the road, Margaret Doyle was beginning to learn what it costs to build something on ground that was never yours.